The night they set him up as a joke, Daniel Carr learned that the loudest thing in any room is the silence that follows a decent man doing the right thing. He was 38 years old, a furniture restorer who worked out of a converted garage in a quiet neighborhood, and the kind of man whose hands were always slightly calloused even when he dressed up. He had been divorced for 2 years, not bitterly, not loudly, just a slow and mutual unraveling with a woman named Cora who had wanted something he did not know how to name. He wasn't broken by it, he was just still, the way a room is still after the last guest leaves and before anyone has thought to clean up. That was Daniel in the months before that Friday evening in October. His friend group, if they could be called that, was led by a man named Marcus, the kind of person who treated other people's discomfort the way some men treated a television remote, something to keep pressing until the channel changed. Marcus had organized what he called a mixer dinner at a restaurant on the east side of town called Oleander's, a place with wooden tables and amber lighting and a menu that used at least 4 unnecessary adjectives per entree. Marcus had told Daniel to come dressed well, that there would be good food and good company, and that maybe this time he'd actually stop being a monk about the whole thing. Daniel had come. He'd worn the dark blue shirt Cora once said made him look like he actually tried. He arrived to find a table of 6 already assembled and an empty chair beside a woman who was sitting with the particular posture of someone who had already decided the evening was going to be a waste. She had brown hair clipped up badly on one side, a green sweater with a small paint stain near the cuff, and 3 children's drawings folded in her jacket pocket that she hadn't had time to take out before running here from whatever the evening had already demanded of her. Her name was Sylvia. She was 41 years old, she was a divorced mother of 3 children under 12, and she had been told by her well-meaning sister that this was a casual dinner with a nice group of people, not a setup, definitely not a setup, just dinner. Marcus had told every other person at the table the truth, the way the seats had been arranged, the looks that passed when Daniel sat down, the barely swallowed smiles. He understood within 40 seconds what was happening. This was a joke. Not a cruel one by Marcus's own modest standards, just the kind of thing that passes for entertainment when your empathy has a short attention span. The logic was simple. Give the quiet divorced man the most complicated option and watch him squirm. A woman with 3 kids and paint on her sleeve. A man who hadn't dated in 2 years. Let the discomfort do the work. Daniel looked at Sylvia. She was looking at the menu. Her jaw was set in a way that said she had already survived worse than this and was prepared to continue doing so. He noticed the drawings in her pocket. He noticed the way she held the menu closer than necessary, using it as a kind of small wall. He said quietly, "I don't know what they told you, but I didn't know you were coming either. I'm Daniel." She lowered the menu a fraction. Her eyes were dark and level and not unkind. "Sylvia," she said, "and for the record, I can tell when a room is waiting for something to go wrong." "Same," he said. "So let's disappoint them." She studied him for a moment the way a person studies a door they're not sure is locked. Then something in her expression shifted. Not warmth exactly. More like the calculation a careful person makes when they have decided to try anyway. She set the menu down. At the other end of the table, Marcus was already leaning toward the man beside him, whispering something that made 2 people smile. Daniel heard the word "good luck" from somewhere to his left. He did not turn his head. He asked Sylvia if she'd been to Oleander's before, and she said once, for a work thing. And the pasta had been acceptable, but the lighting was doing too much work. He said the menu agreed. He'd counted 11 adjectives in the description of a bread basket. She looked down at her menu and counted silently, and said 12 if you included artisanal, which she personally thought had been retired by popular vote in 2019. The corner of her mouth moved. Rain had started outside, tapping against the glass in small, uneven patterns. The waiter came. The table ordered. Marcus made a comment about how Daniel might need to install a car seat in his truck that landed with the particular thud of a joke that the joker finds funnier than anyone else. 2 people laughed. Sylvia's expression did not change. Daniel turned toward Marcus with the calm, unhurried patience of a man who has measured twice and is cutting once. "You'll have to speak up," he said. "We can't hear the joke from here." The table went quiet. Marcus smiled the smile of a man recalculating. Someone at the far end of the table reached for their water glass with the energy of a person who suddenly needed something to do with their hands. Sylvia did not look at Marcus. She looked at Daniel with an expression that said she had not expected that and did not quite know what to do with it yet. The food arrived. They talked. Not the careful social performance talking that happens when a room is watching, but the real kind. the kind that finds its own pace when two people stop pretending they're not interesting. She told him she worked as an interior designer, mostly residential, mostly people who thought they wanted bold colors until the paint went up. He told her about a walnut dining table he was currently restoring that had 3 generations of initials carved into the underside of the leaf. She asked how he knew whether to keep them or sand them down. He said he always kept them. She said that was the right answer. Her youngest had drawn a dragon on the back of one of the folded papers in her pocket. She showed him without quite meaning to. He'd asked what was in her pocket, and she'd pulled it out before the privacy instinct kicked in. The dragon had 6 legs and what appeared to be a briefcase. He said it looked like middle management. She laughed. A real laugh, short and surprised and unguarded. And the table heard it. And for a moment, the ambient smirking from Marcus's end of things went quiet in a different way than before. Less anticipatory, more recalculating. They were on coffee when her phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with the particular alertness that parents carry like a second nervous system. She said her sister had her kids and everything was fine, but she needed to leave by 9. He said, of course. She looked at him as if she was waiting for the addendum, the pressure, the mild guilt, the suggestion that she was leaving too soon. And it didn't come. He just nodded and asked if the coffee was all right. She said the coffee was better than the breadbasket deserved to be in a place with this many adjectives. When she stood to leave and began pulling on her jacket, Marcus said, loudly enough for the table, "Careful, Sylvia, you might be biting off more than you can chew." He was grinning. He thought this was still funny. He had not updated. Daniel did not raise his voice. He said, "That's because you think everyone is for sale just because you are." He said it the way he might note that a wood panel had warped, not with drama, just with accuracy. The table was very quiet. Sylvia looked at him. Her jacket was half on, and her expression was the kind a person gets when they have been standing in a cold place for a long time, and someone has just placed warm hands on either side of their face. She finished putting her jacket on. She reached into her pocket and found the card from her design firm and set it on the table in front of him. "If you want to call, call," she said. "Don't decide someone's importance before you know it." She was talking to the table. She was talking to him. She left. The bell above the restaurant door rang once. Marcus said something about it being a good bit. Nobody at the table agreed with the energy he was expecting. Daniel looked at the card for a moment. The rain was heavier now. He finished his coffee. He called the next afternoon. Not the day after that, not 3 days later with a casual opener. The next afternoon, because he was not performing coolness, and the number was in his hand, and pretending otherwise would have been its own kind of dishonesty. She answered on the 3rd ring. She said she hadn't been sure he'd call. He said he'd been sure. She was quiet for a beat and then said that was either very confident or very honest. He said he didn't have the energy to be the other one anymore. They met for coffee that Saturday at a place near her studio called Margot's, small mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu that made no promises it couldn't keep. She came in with a scarf instead of the green sweater and her hair down, and she looked different from the careful posture of oleanders, more settled in herself, the way a person looks when they're somewhere they chose rather than somewhere they were placed. They sat for 2.5 hours. She told him about the divorce. Not all of it, just the useful outline. A man named Trevor who had confused reliability with surrender and eventually left for someone who needed less of him. Daniel told her about Cora. She asked what went wrong. He said he thought maybe nothing went wrong exactly. They'd just been two people who loved each other to the edge of their capacity and found the edge sooner than expected. She looked at her coffee cup. She said she thought that was the most honest thing she'd heard someone say about a divorce, and she'd been in 3 years of therapy. Her youngest's name was Eli. The middle one was a girl named June. The oldest, 9 years old, was a boy named Marcus. She watched Daniel's expression when she said this, and he didn't flinch, and she seemed to find that useful data. He asked about them not to be polite, but because she brightened when she talked about them. Specifically, the way a person brightens when they get to stop performing and just be accurate. Eli had a thing about trains. June had painted her bedroom wall with handprints and refused to apologize. The oldest, Marcus, had recently decided that the word "actually" needed to appear in every sentence he spoke, and Sylvia was choosing to view it as a phase. 3 weeks later, he came to her house for dinner. Not a date. The kids were there, and she said it clearly, not as a disclaimer, but as information. He brought a small wooden box he'd made for Eli, the right size for a small train collection. He had not told Sylvia he was bringing it. She saw it when he came in and said nothing for a moment, then said quietly, while the kids were making noise in the other room, You didn't have to do that. He said he knew. She looked at him steadily. Daniel. He said yes. She said, I'm not made of glass. He said he knew that too. She said, then stop being so careful. He said the only reason he was being careful was because he knew what he was trying not to break. She stepped forward and took the lapel of his jacket in one hand and said very quietly, Are you trying not to kiss me? He looked at her. Rain outside, the distant sound of a small argument in the other room about whose turn it was, the lamp in the hall throwing amber light across the linoleum. He said he had been trying not to for about 15 minutes. She said that was approximately 15 minutes too long. He kissed her, and it was not dramatic, and it was exactly right. In the other room, Eli found the wooden box and shouted something entirely unintelligible with complete certainty. June came to the kitchen doorway, looked at them both, said, finally, with the authority of a person 4 times her age, and returned to whatever she had been doing. The oldest, Marcus, appeared briefly, assessed the situation, said, Actually, I knew this was happening, and vanished. Daniel laughed. A full, real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere below the chest. And Sylvia looked at him laughing, and looked at her children's noise, and looked at her kitchen and said, I know this is a lot. He said, I know it is. She said, Still here? He said, Still here. 6 months became a year. The wooden box for Eli became a shelf unit with a train track routed through the brackets, an entire engineering undertaking that took one long Saturday and the input of 3 opinionated children. June painted one small handprint on the wall of the garage, low down near the workbench, and Daniel left it there. The oldest, Marcus, in the way of 9-year-old boys who decide someone has passed an invisible threshold, began occasionally addressing him with a kind of casual familiarity that Sylvia pretended not to notice because it made her eyes do something she was still working out how to explain. On a Sunday morning in May, with coffee cups on the porch railing and the garden coming up in the way gardens do when someone has finally paid attention to them, Daniel reached into the pocket of his jacket, the same dark blue one he'd worn to Oleander's, and found a ring that had taken him 3 weeks to make himself, a simple band in warm gold with a small detail in the metal that, if you knew what you were looking for, was the same grain pattern as the walnut table with the initials carved underneath. He didn't make a speech. He was not a speech-making kind of person. He held it out and said her name once. Sylvia looked at the ring. She looked at him. Her eyes did the thing she had been working out how to explain. She said yes, the way a person says yes when the word is not an answer, but an arrival. The kids heard from inside. June appeared at the screen door with paint on her hands. Eli pressed his face against the glass. The oldest, Marcus, opened the door, looked at the ring, looked at Daniel, said, Actually, I think that works out, and held the door open as if offering a formal welcome. The coffee on the porch railing had gone cold. The garden was very green. Somewhere a lawnmower started up and stopped again, and the morning sat around them like a thing that had been waiting to happen. They married in October, 1 year to the month from the dinner at Oleander's, in a backyard with string lights and paper napkins, and a breadbasket from a bakery that used no adjectives at all. Marcus, their Marcus, the original and the grown one both, was in attendance. One of them gave a toast. The other one held a toy train and looked solemn and important. Daniel stood at the front of their yard and watched Sylvia walk toward him on her sister's arm and thought about what he had said that night, quietly, to a woman holding a menu like a shield. Let's disappoint them. He had meant it about the table. He had not known then that what they were going to disappoint was every story in which people like them, careful and complicated and slightly calloused at the edges, arrived too late or left too soon, or talked themselves out of the real thing before it had a chance to settle. She reached him. She looked at him the way she had looked at him in the kitchen doorway with his lapel in her hand, steady and decided and entirely unafraid. He thought about the walnut table in his garage with the initials carved on the underside of the leaf. He had always kept them. This, he understood now, was the same impulse, the knowledge that what had been there before was not a damage to repair, but a record of having been real. He took her hand. The string lights came on overhead. Someone in the back row was crying, and it was not Marcus. So here is what he wants to ask you. If you had been at that table at Oleander's, if you had sat down at what was supposed to be a joke and felt the room waiting for you to be uncomfortable, what would you have done? And have you ever met someone at the wrong moment, in the wrong circumstances, and understood anyway that you were exactly where you were supposed to be? Leave your story in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and he will see you in the next one. The year after the wedding was the kind of year that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a landmark event or a conversation that both people will remember exactly. It arrives in accumulation, in the coffee made a specific way without being asked, in the pattern of whose side of the bed gets cold first, in the particular shorthand that develops between two people who have stopped performing for each other and started simply being in the same place. Daniel understood this, had lived it in a previous life, and understood now the difference between the version that stops and the version that continues. This one continued. He finished the walnut table that spring, the one with the initials carved underneath the leaf, and sold it to a family in the next town over. He told them about the carvings. The father, a man in his 50s with the look of someone who has seen enough to be grateful for the small things, ran his fingers over the letters and said he wouldn't touch them. Daniel drove home with the truck empty and the windows down and felt the kind of lightness that comes not from having let something go, but from having given it the right place to land. Sylvia was in the garden when he got back. She had dirt on her knees and her hair clipped up badly, the same way it had been at Oleander's, and she was arguing quietly with a rosebush that was not cooperating. Eli was in the grass behind her, arranging a train set across the uneven ground with the total seriousness of a small engineer. June was on the porch with her hands already looking for something to paint. The oldest, Marcus, was sitting in the one good chair doing homework with the studied casualness of a boy who wanted to appear older than he was. Daniel came through the gate and Sylvia looked up and said, "The table?" He said it had found a good home. She nodded, the kind of nod that carries more than agreement. Eli looked up from the train tracks and held up one car in greeting without stopping his work. June waved from the porch with a paintbrush. The oldest, Marcus said, without looking up from his homework, "Actually, dinner would be good soon if that's happening." Daniel stood at the gate for a moment and looked at all of them. The string lights from the wedding were still up, permanent now by unanimous decision. The garden was doing better than last year. The garage held 2 projects and the workbench with June's handprint still near the leg, low down, where it would always be. He thought about Marcus from Oleander's. The original Marcus, the one with the grin and the short attention span for other people's feelings, who had called twice since the wedding, both times with the low-frequency energy of a man trying to work out whether he owed an apology. Daniel had not made it easy for him or difficult. He had just been himself, which was the only response he had ever found that actually worked. He came inside. He washed his hands at the kitchen sink. Sylvia came in behind him with dirt on her hands and stood beside him at the sink, and their shoulders touched and neither of them moved apart. She said, "Good day?" He said it had been. She turned the tap off and looked at him and said, not for the first time, but in the way that things can be said more than once and still mean more each time, "I'm glad you stayed." He dried his hands on the kitchen towel. He said, "Where else would I go?" Outside, the lawn mower from the neighbor's yard started up. Eli announced something about the train track that required immediate parental attention. June called from the porch that she needed more blue. The oldest, Marcus, appeared in the kitchen doorway, looked at them both, said, "Actually, can we have pasta?" and disappeared. The kitchen smelled like coffee and dirt from the garden and something Sylvia had been making earlier that still held warmth in the air. Daniel looked at the kitchen. He looked at his wife. He thought about a rainy night in a restaurant with amber lighting and a woman holding a menu like a shield and a table full of people waiting for something to go wrong. He thought about what it had cost to simply be decent in that room, which was nothing. It had cost nothing, and yet it had led here, to this kitchen, to this ordinary and irreplaceable Friday evening with the lights on and the people in it making noise. Sometimes careful is just fear with better manners. He had said that once, out loud, to no one in particular during a long afternoon in the garage. It was true. He had been careful for 2 years, careful in the way that is really just a longer word for stopped. And then he had sat down at a table that was supposed to be a joke and stayed in his own skin and been himself, and a woman with paint on her sleeve and dragons in her pocket had done the same, and that was the whole of it. That was the mechanism. Not grand or geometric, just 2 people choosing not to perform their damage. He turned on the stove. He found the pasta. Outside, the string lights came on as the light changed, the way they were set to do each evening, reliable as anything he had ever built, and the yard filled with warm gold, and the sound of a small boy's train moving across uneven grass toward something that needed no particular destination to be completely, thoroughly worth the ride. What would you have done if you had been set up as a joke and realized it within the first minute? And have you ever sat down next to a stranger in the wrong circumstances and understood quietly and without ceremony that something was beginning? Tell me in the comments. If this one found you at the right time, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.